Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lisa Partida with Homemaking LA, and today we have Tom Fuentes with Bank of Hope, and today's topic is going to be managing debt. So I'll go ahead and pass it along to Tom. Take it
Thanks,
away.
Lisa. Appreciate that. Yeah, so managing debt. This workshop is like gargantuan. There's like 6 or 7 sections. So for the purposes of time, there's like 90 slides. We're gonna go over the most important ones, which is gonna be the first three. The other three are like super specific. Like one section is specifically like college debt, another section is specifically medical debt. Because they're so specific, I think the first three sections are more general and can be more applicable to a lot of us. So we're gonna cover those ones. So, first, like what is debt, right? So we're going to define and contrast the difference between debit and credit. We're going to learn how to list debts, understand how to kind of rank order them, so to speak, and then explain how debt can affect your overall financial situation. So let's talk about the key takeaway from the first section. So, understanding your debt is the first step in understanding how to manage it. First, let's define some key terms. So, what is the difference between debit and credit? So, essentially, debt is money that you owe. So, like, say you have a credit card and you use it, you owe the money back to whoever you issued that credit card, right? So, say you got a credit card from Bank of America, you owe debt to Bank of America. Credit, on the other hand, is the ability to borrow money. Like you haven't borrowed the money yet. So you can use credit to borrow money, which then becomes your debt. So you can have credit without having debt. For example, if you opened a credit card and you didn't use it, you didn't incur any debt because you didn't use it. But you have credit at your disposal up to the maximum amount that your credit limit is. You can also have debt without having credit. If you borrow money to buy a car, for example, you have a debt. So, what's the difference then between a creditor and a debtor? So, more key terms. So, someone who owes money is called the debtor. Okay, so in that Bank of America credit card situation I gave you, you would be the debtor. The person, business, or organization that you owe money to, in this case, Bank of America, for example, would be considered the creditor or the lender. Many of us make mistakes when it comes to handling debt. Understanding your debt is the first way to manage it. So, to understand your debt, you first need to know who you owe, how much you owe them, like what's the remaining balance, how much the payments are, when the payments are due, and then other important facts such as what's your interest rate, what fees, including any penalty fees for not following the rules of the loan or the credit, are there, such as like late fees? Like, what are those totals? Prepayment penalties, which are fees lenders sometimes charge if you pay off your loan too early. Balloon payments, which are larger than usual one-time payments at the end of a loan term. If you have a loan with a balloon payment, your payments may be lower in the years before the balloon payment, but you could owe a big amount at the end of the term of the loan. You can gather all the information specifically about your debts by pulling your free credit report on annualcreditreport.com. Um, Another way that you can manage debts and understand what they are, look at your monthly bills, look at the statements you receive. I use one credit card. I look at that credit card every time I get the new statement to make sure those are the purchases I made, to make sure that those are the purchases and the correct dollar amounts of which I made them at. Um, so yeah, so review your statements for whatever debts you have. Uh, uh, that could get you more going on like understanding who you owe and what the amounts are and when they're due. Personal agreements for loans that you have with family or friends could be another debt that you might have incurred. For those, maybe write down and keep a log if you in fact have those. So what do you do after you gather all this information? So after you gather information about debts, it might help you think about why you incurred that debt in the first place. So this is kind of like the why wheel. People that get into debts for like a whole host of reasons that probably aren't only represented here on the screen. You can incur debts by purchasing assets such as cars, homes. Some people would consider their college education, for example, an asset. Maybe even schooling um, to become a doctor or something specific. Paying bills, or perhaps maybe because you didn't pay your bills on time. When people can't afford to pay bills in cash, they sometimes incur debt to pay them. For example, if you pay your utility bill by using a credit card, or if you pay any bill by using a credit card, really, because remember, when you're using your credit card, every time you swipe it, you're creating debt for yourself. Covering unexpected expenses or emergencies. If you don't have cash set aside for emergencies, and often when we do our financial literacy workshops, we talk about setting aside an emergency fund. Some people recommend starting with 3 months of your annual salary. Some people suggest 6 months. Some people suggest 12 months. Um, but just having money set aside for emergency could be helpful so that you don't use that credit card to incur a debt. Say, for example, you need a car repair, and even like say you take it to Firestone, right? Which is I'm pretty sure they're a national chain, so there's a lot of locations. They have their own credit card, right? If you don't have a credit card already and you get approved for that for your car repair and you don't have an emergency fund, they might ask you to open up credit with them. But when you're doing that, you're also incurring a debt, aren't you? A big one though, right? You can see in the blue in the upper right hand part of the wheel. It's the needs versus wants scenario. People incur debt to do things like eating out, taking a vacation that they otherwise couldn't afford, purchasing clothing when it may not be necessary because they have stuff in the closet already. There's a whole host of reasons that we're not covering completely here, but I think you kind of get the idea. These are kind of like the main ones I would say. Debt can affect your financial situation again in several reasons. You'll need to use income you receive in the future to make payments on your debt. This is sometimes called obligating your future income. In other words, you'll have fewer choices about how to use your future income because you'll need to use it to repay your bills or the debts that you've accrued in the past. You'll generally pay interest too, and sometimes fees on your debt until you pay that off in full. That means you are paying more money than you would have paid for if you just would have paid for that car repair or that refrigerator or that washer and dryer, for example, if you would have had an emergency fund and you were able to pay it in cash. Of course, completely understandable, easier said than done. Our situations are completely different, right? You may not be able to reach your goals on time, or you may reach your goals later than you had planned or had hoped to. For example, if you have too much debt, you may not qualify for that mortgage that you were hoping because you wanted to buy a house, or it may even block you from the ability to rent the apartment that you want. So remember, this is obligating not only future income, but obligating your future um, wants and desires also for the most part. Now, what we have here is our first apply it in understanding my debt in the participant guide. Please check out this section in the participant guide after the workshop. But essentially, this is kind of the whole crux of the first section of managing debt. What you're going to do in order to understand your debt for this particular section is gather information on your debts, and you're going to complete the table here. I don't think we have the full table here. We don't. Let me explain what you can expect when you check this out. Essentially, in the participant guide, there's going to be six boxes that you see, which is going to comprise of the debt table. And then there's also going to be a checklist. How did you get most of your debt that you're going to check off? Let me give you an example. So what I would do is I would gather up all my statements and I would fill this out. So essentially what I would do is I would say who I owe money to. I would say number one, my Chase credit card. The amount I owe is $1,104. The payment amount due, I think the minimum payment's something like in the realm of $50 to $100. The payment due date is, I believe, April 27th. And then the interest rate on that is in between 20 and 27%. So I would fill that out. The debt table number two would be the credit union where I have my mortgage. The total amount due is $2,700, for example. The payment amounts, or excuse me, the total amount I owe would be the total amount of my mortgage. The payment amount would be whatever my mortgage payment is. And honestly, I don't remember. It's on auto pay, and I've been here for a long time. I don't even remember, but just for example, we'll say 2,700. The payment due date is would have been April 1st, so it's already paid. And then the interest rate on it is, I don't recall, between 3 and 10%, we'll say. But I think you get the idea. If you have a car loan, you would put it there. If you took out a college loan, you would put it there. If you have further credit card debt, you would list your credit card. If you owe money because of personal obligations to friends or family, you would put that there. And essentially, what we have is we have our debt table filled out, and that's going to allow us to understand, one, who we owe money to, the total amount of that debt that we owe, what the payment amount is, when the due dates are, and then the interest rate. You'll see why this is important in a later section. But this helps us understand and how to manage it because we can see it, right? And then the last step is understanding my debt. How did most of your debt occur? Like why? The why, right? So it would be the check box that we can't see, but I'll describe it. Say, and it pretty much goes back to what we talked about um, on the wheel here. Did you get it by purchasing assets? Did you get it by paying bills? Did you incur your debt by covering unexpected expenses because of an emergency? So anyway, check out that section in the participant guide, and it'll give you an overall better understanding of where to start once you list out your debts. And you'll see why it's important a little bit later. Now that we kind of understand the nuts and bolts of understanding my debt, let's talk about how it works, how it functions from section 2, okay? So we're going to define key terms related to debt, explain how different types of debt work, particularly what the difference between installment loans and revolving credit lines are. So the key takeaway from the section, consider how debt works so that you can make informed decisions about it, okay? So let's see here. We're going to go through a section of debt lingo to understand some key terms that we need to define. So let's look at the debt lingo number 1. A loan with collateral that the lender can take if the loan is not repaid according to the loan agreement. So is it A, principal, B, secured loan, or A, annual percentage rate? And then we'll also give an example of the answer. So a loan with collateral in this would be B, secured loan. So for example, a home mortgage is a secured loan because the loan's secured by the home that you're purchasing. So essentially the home is the collateral of the security for your mortgage. So that would be a secured loan. So let's go to debt lingo number 2. How much money you borrow? A, principal, B, interest, C, fees. So the amount of money that you borrow is considered the principal amount. It's the principal amount, okay? Debt lingo number 3. What is the main cost of borrowing money? So if the amount of money you owe is the principal, what is the cost of you borrowing that money? Is it A, current balance, B, interest, or C, credit? It's essentially what the financial institution's charging you for allowing you to borrow that money. And the answer on this one is going to be B, interest. It is the interest charge of you borrowing the money. So debt lingo number 4, a credit agreement that allows you to borrow money from time to time up to the pre-approved maximum credit line. Okay. So is it, and then I think the tip off here is the from time to time. Okay. So is it A, installment loan, B, revolving credit, or C, lease agreement? And then we'll give an example. So on this one, the answer is B, revolving credit. Okay. And the easiest example of that would be a credit card because a credit card doesn't have an end term to it, it revolves. It revolves. You essentially get a new card after the expiration. So, for example, if I had a credit card with the expiration of September 2028, the credit doesn't expire then. It just means that I'm going to get a new credit to replace that one on before that date. Okay. So that's a revolving line. That is a credit card. So debt lingo number 5, the total cost of credit on a yearly basis. A yearly basis. That's the tip off on this one. Is it A, annual fees, B, annual adjustment, or C, annual percentage rate? And often you see
Uh,
this one expressed as a acronym.
C?
Yeah. So the answer on this
Okay.
one, thanks, Lisa. C, annual percentage rate, which is most oftenly referred to, and you probably would recognize it, is usually APR. Okay, so that's the total cost of credits on the credit on the yearly basis. APR, annual percentage rate. All right. So more key terms, debt lingo number 6. When you borrow a specific amount of money and repay it over a set period of time. So this one's different, right? Because we already talked about that one where it's revolving, right? So that's kind of the tip off in this one. When you borrow a specific amount of money to repay in a set period of time. So we know it's not a revolving credit, right? We already had that example, right? So is it B, principal, or C, installment loan? And then we'll give an example.
Installment loan.
Yeah, so on this one is C, installment loan. And I think the most common installment loan would be something like maybe your home mortgage. But it also could be if you bought a car and you borrowed money to buy the car, right? Because say you bought a car and the term of the loan was 72 months. That means that you have up until that set period of time of 72 months to pay it off. And most commonly, if we go back to the mortgage example, the two most common terms are 15-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage, which means that you pay off that in that set amount of time. And then also, let's throw in another example. What about a student loan? A student loan also will have a fixed amount of time. All right, so let's move on to debt lingo number 7, a loan with no collateral. Would that be A, secured loan, B, unsecured loan, or C, mortgage? And then we'll also give an example of that one. And then we kind of have the
Unsecured loan?
alternative of it. Yeah, yeah. So Lisa
Okay.
said B, unsecured loan. That's right. And an example of an unsecured loan would be something like credit card debt. Because remember, a credit card has no collateral attached to it. The only thing that's really attached to credit card debt and its usage is your promise when you sign on the dotted line when the bank gives you the credit card. It's not secured by anything, not like when you're buying a house and the loan is secured to the mortgage, where if you don't pay your loan, then the bank could take your mortgage, take your house. Another example would be something like a student loan. Student loans aren't secured by anything. It's just you promising the bank that you're going to pay back what you owe after you finish your degree, for example. So now that we kind of understand some more key terms and these debt lingos, right? Now let's talk about like how debt like actually works. And we're gonna understand it by talking about installment loans and revolving credit, which we kind of already touched on, but let's kind of get into the more nitty-gritty of it, right? So with an installment loan, you borrow a set amount of money, and we already talked about it, right? It's principal. That's the amount of money that you owe. You repay the principal plus the interest that the bank's charging you over a set period of time, and that's considered the term of the loan. You generally pay the same amount of money every payment unless you have a variable or adjustable interest rate. And sometimes we can see this on like an adjustable rate mortgage, for example. With a variable or adjustable rate, the monthly payment will be recalculated based on what the new interest rate is. Okay. A lender will use factors that include your credit score and how much of your income is used to pay debts to determine whether to offer you the loan in the first place, right? They will also use these factors to decide what terms to offer you, such as what interest rate to charge. With revolving credit, you borrow up to a maximum credit limit. So the most that you can borrow is going to be that credit limit. It's generally set based on credit related information that includes your credit score and how much debt you have. The amount you must pay is based on how much credit you've used. You must pay at least the minimum amount due every payment, which usually represents about 1 to 5% of your outstanding balance. But it's also important to remember that you can pay more than the minimum, or you can pay off, or you can pay off your credit card altogether, for example. The more you pay, the sooner you pay down the debt, and the less money you owe in the future because you're incurring less interest over time. Okay. So in our next part of the participant guide, you can see in the try it section how installment loans work by looking at this scenario with Zoe. So please check out this after the workshop. But let's talk briefly about what we will encounter with the Zoe's situation. So Zoe knew her credit needed some work. She learned her bank offered something called a credit building loan. You may often hear this as like there's also credit card building instruments that help you rebuild your credit as well. Anyway, the credit building loan would allow her to borrow 1,000 and repay it over 12 months at a 12% interest rate. Her payments would be reported to one of the three national credit reporting agencies. As long as she made her payments on time and she agreed, this would help improve her credit. So she thought this sounded like a great deal, and then she encountered the amortization table. So let me see if we have part of the amortization schedule here. And so what does this mean? So Zoe learns about revolving credit. Okay. She doesn't use her credit card for other purchases each month. She only pays the minimum amount, which is 5% of the balance. So we can see, remember, she's taking out 1,000. So you can see on line item number 1 what her beginning balance is. Her beginning balance is 1,000. And remember, we said that the minimum payments are going to be reflective of 5%. So at 1,000, you can see that her minimum monthly payment is going to be $50. Of the $50, because remember, she's being charged 12% interest, of the 50, her principal that's going to go to her principal is $40, and the interest that the bank's charging her is $10. So we can see the ending balance after her January payment is $960. Okay. Now, her next month, we're starting with $960. So now her monthly minimum payment at 5% is $48. When she pays the 48, $38.40 goes to principal, $960 goes to interest, reducing her total balance to $921.60. So what you're going to see here, and we don't have it completely listed, is the complete amortization schedule. And basically what this means is that in the box, we're going to have the full 12 years all the way down to when she pays off the total amount. And I think that this is a great exercise to understand how like the mechanics of actual borrowing money works, because it's going to let you see what the beginning balance was at 1,000 and what the ending is at the end of the 12 years when Zoe owes 0. It's going to show you how the balance reduces over time. It's going to show you how the minimum monthly balance decreases. and how the principal and interest decreases with the ending balance. Okay, so check that out after the workshop. I think it's good to kind of understand uh, how the payment schedule kind of works. So now that we understand a little bit more about kind of how that works, let's talk about fees. Loan and credit agreements may also involve several different types of fees. Fees are additional charges. There are not interest, so completely separate from interest. So, for example, credit cards may have an annual fee, or they may have fee for late payments. They may have fees for going over the credit limit, or other fees also. Okay. Car loans may have a documentation fee, a closing fee, and perhaps other fees too. It's important to understand fees because you need to understand what they are because they're kind of hidden charges, even though you're going to understand what the fees are by reading the disclosures before you sign on the dotted line. But it's also important that you understand the fees you'll be charged, um, and whether or not it'll be on a continual basis, for example, on a revolving line of credit like a credit card. And then the fees you may be charged if you don't repay the loan, like with as you agreed when you decided to take that loan out, for example. Other fees could be like prepayment fees. Prepayment is the early repayment of all or part of your loan. When you prepay, you pay the lender more than the monthly payment, and you may have to apply the extra amount to your outstanding balance. So prepayment is one strategy that you can use for reducing the cost of borrowing money. If you prepay your loan in full, you won't incur more interest because you no longer owe that money. So the less money that you'll be charged in interest over that period of time. If you prepay part of your loan, you generally pay less money on the interest over the time, right? Lenders sometimes, however, charge a prepayment penalty. So it's going to be important for you to read those disclosures to understand if you can avoid any prepayment penalties by paying off your debts early. Okay? So that brings us to the end of section 2, considering how debt works so that you can make more informed decisions about taking out debt, right? So in our last section that we're going to cover, section 3, we're going to talk about reduction of debt. We're going to explain 2 methods of reducing debt, the high cost debt first method and the snowball method. We're going to list where people can get help managing debt and then identifying issues to be aware of when you're getting help managing your debt. So the key takeaway from section 3, develop a plan to reduce your debt and get help if needed, such as from a trained credit counselor. So let's talk about those 2 strategies that we talked about. Many of us want to reduce debt. It's not always easy, but it can be an important financial goal, and it's totally worth the effort. There's 2 general strategies, the high cost debt first method, in which you pay off the debt that has the highest cost to you. That's usually the debt with the highest interest rate. Or the snowball method, in which you can pay off the debt with the lowest balance first. Both strategies work. They're going to be applicable to us in different situations. What am I saying? Neither strategy is better. These are just the 2 most used options, I would say, that are out there. In the planet section, the participant guide on page 15, choose the strategy you think that's going to work best for you. Now, why isn't there one set it and forget it method? Well, we all have different debts, right? There can't be one set it and forget it method because not only do some of us have more debts than others, but others are going to have higher interest rates than others. Others are going to have a more broader credit mix than others. But check this out in the participant guide because this is going to help us set us up on doing the high cost debt method. So to use this method, you're going to list your debts in order. So you're going to have to gather up all your statements. You're going to have to get the payment amount that you owe. And then, if possible, you're going to make an extra payment to the first debt on your list. That will be the one with the highest cost to you. Okay. So let's talk about this method. So the high cost debt first method has the advantage of saving you money because you're paying less interest over time. The disadvantage is that the progress is going to feel slower. So let's talk about the nuts and bolts of how it works. You're going to list the debts in order from the highest cost to you to the lowest. The highest cost debt is usually the debt with the highest interest rate. For credit cards, you can find the interest rate on your monthly statements. For other loans, you can find it in documents you received when you first took out the loan. It may also be on your accountant statement if you get one. If you're still unable to find the rate, contact the lender or ask your local branch if that's where you took out the debt from. Pay the amount due on each debt you listed so the lender receives it by the due date. So, for example, this could be the minimum monthly payment for a credit card or the regular monthly payment for a loan. You can often set up automatic payments so that you can be confident that the lender will receive the amount by the due date. Then, if possible, make extra payments to the first debt on your list. That will be the one with the highest cost to you. Ask the lender if you specify that your extra payment must be applied to the principal. If the answer is yes, ask what you need to do to make that request happen. After you pay off that first debt, make the extra payment to the next debt on the list and then continue as needed. Okay. But check out that section in the participant guide for the high cost debt method first worksheet so that you can make the approach more applicable to you when you list out the debts that you have. Okay. So that's the high cost debt first method. Let's talk about Snowball. And in the most recent um, YouTube video that I saw on managing debt and them addressing these methods, they recommended the snowball method. It allows you to pay off debts quicker. We'll talk about why. But again, there's no one size fit all method. No method's better than the other. I don't even know if I have a preferred method. I think when I was trying to get out of debt, I used a blend of both. Um, anyhow, so the snowball method has the advantage of making progress faster by eliminating small debts first, which can be completely motivating because to pay off the debt and then be done with it and then move on to the next one can add kind of fuel to your fire. It could like kind of be that extra push step forward that'll allow you to start knocking them out, right? The disadvantage, though, is that you're paying more money because you're likely not paying off the costliest debt first. So let's talk about how it works. So list your debts in order from the lowest remaining balance to the highest. Pay the amount due on each debt you listed so that the lender receives it by the due date. Then make an extra payment to the first debt on your list. That will be the one with the lowest balance. After you pay off the first debt, make that extra payment to the next debt on the list, and then continue as necessary, just like the first method that we discussed. And then also, in addition to this being in the participant guide, there's also a snowball method worksheet in the participant guide that can help you do this approach if it's the approach that you want to do. On page 19 of the participant guide, we have another try it section, which is making a plan to reduce debt. And in this situation, we have a scenario with Brian. So it took Brian some time to find a new job after the hospital where he worked closed, but his new job at a medical supply warehouse makes great use of his skills. Um, so we have now that he has a steady paycheck and has some money saved for an emergency, he can start making reduction in his debt. So those debt include credit card debt that accumulated during a period of unemployment, his car loan, medical debt from when he was in the hospital a few years back. So what we have here is Brian's debt table. And in Brian's debt table, you can see that Brian owes $8,000 to his credit card at 14% interest. You can see that his medical debt's 10,000 at 10%. And you can see that the car loan is 2,000 at 6%. So in this scenario, on this worksheet, we can see that he has adjusted his debts to use the high cost debt method first. And in this scenario, we can see that the debts are ranked by how much the debt costs him. So essentially what we've done is we've ranked ordered these debts according to which debt has the highest interest amount. So we can see that we've ranked the debts and how Brian's going to pay off his debts by attacking the credit card first because that's the most costliest at 14%. We can also see that the second most costliest debt, because it's the second highest interest rate, is the 10% that's on his medical debt. And then finally, the car loan, which has the lowest interest rate at 6%. So he would be making extra payments to the credit card first because that has the highest interest rate. So this kind of gives you a visual representation of how the high cost debt first method would work. We're ordering them based on what has the highest interest rate. The opposite of that is what Brian would do if he used the snowball method. So we can see the snowball method, we're rank ordering the debt based on the lowest amount first. So we can see that Brian would be making extra payments to the car loan so that he could get that paid off faster, even though it cost him more money, right? So essentially what we're doing is we're ranking these based on the lowest amount owed so that we can start paying off things with the smallest balance faster. Okay? So that kind of gives you a visual representation of the snowball method. Now, where to get help. So if you need help managing your debt, considering seeking help from a nonprofit credit counseling agency, simply go to Google and do a Google search on nonprofit credit counseling agencies to see what agencies are near you. The best thing about these agencies is that their services are provided for free. Also, you can check out www.usa.gov and search for credit counseling agency, and that will give you an idea. There's also tips that can be found on the Federal Trade Commission or FTC's website on how to find and choose a credit counselor. And then also you could check out financial literacy workshops for nonprofits such as Home Again LA, where we do financial literacy twice a month. And we cover several different topics. And maybe that'll be a way that you can kind of understand how to become more financial literate and manage debt and a whole bunch of other topics that we cover. There's also debt settlement companies and debt consolidation, but you have to choose these carefully. Debt settlement companies and debt consolidations loans offer help and relief with debt. Before using these services, however, be sure that you understand them because some services may be offered, but they could be completely costly. Debt settlement companies offer to make deals with your creditors to reduce debts that you owe, but ask questions about the fees in the process. What fees would you pay, especially upfront charges? Charging a fee before settling at least one of your debts is illegal for most debt settlement companies. What will they do for you if they tell you to stop paying your creditors and you do so, you may end up in more debt than you have started. This may lower your credit scores and add late fees and interest to your accounts. Find more information by visiting www.consumerfinance.gov and searching debt settlement so you can get some more information on that topic. Debt consolidation means taking out a loan and using it to pay off multiple debts, you may be able to get a debt consolidation loan from a bank, a credit union, or a nonprofit organization, or a private finance company. Debt consolidations loan may cost you more than the loans that they replace, however. Ask questions about the interest rates and the costs. The lower the interest rate in debt consolidations loan may be a teaser rate, where it's an introductory offer, but then it may lock in at a higher interest over time. The loan may also include fees or costs you would not have to pay if you continued making your regular payments. Although monthly payments may be lower, it may be because you're paying over a longer period of time, where they're stretching out that bulk balance over a longer period of time, thus reducing the monthly payment, making it look like you're paying less. On page 22 of the participant guide, there's some things in a checklist here that you can check out after the workshop. So you can use this checklist to identify some items to watch out for when you're getting help managing your debt. They can be a good reminder to ask more questions. Ask questions if a company charges fees before it will settle your debts. If it guarantees it can make your debt go away completely, guarantees that your debt can be paid off for pennies on the dollar, sounds way too good to be true. Tells you you can stop your debt collection and calls and lawsuits. And there's a lot of other ones, but please check out this section in the participant guide in understanding if you're seeking outside counsel for debt consolidation or debt settlement. So this brings us to the key takeaway of this section and to our workshop close for the evening. Developing a plan to reduce your debt and get help if needed, such as from a trained credit counselor at a nonprofit agency. So that's our workshop on understanding and managing debt. I hope that helps. Happy to answer any questions. But I think even a key takeaway, or at least a finer point of something that we talked about, is that if you have the ability first to establish savings for your emergency fund before you start deciding whether or not you want to use one of the two methods we discussed, would probably be a first step that you would want to take in kind of taking the first step in managing your debt, I would say.
So I'm actually not going to be doing debt consolidation, but I actually got a credit card to help me kind of pay down like the last bit of debt that I have.
Yeah,
So I don't know if, this, I mean, I guess it does apply because you're obviously paying off your debt, but just maybe a word of advice to find something that maybe has like a good deal, like 0% APR for like
yeah.
more than 12 months, for example.
I'm
I
glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Because right now the Wells Fargo actually is offering a credit card for 21 months, zero APR. So
Yeah.
that's pretty good start. So I mean, like if you're
And
trying to pay off $1,000, you could pay it off within 12 months without any
yeah,
interest.
that's actually how I took my first step in managing my debt years ago when I was trying to pay everything off. Now, again, in the workshops that we do, like, this is not financial advice. We're not like professionals in any way, but so we're not recommending anything specific. However, I'm glad you brought it up, Lisa, because specifically, I way back in the day, I think I had multiple credit cards, like three or four. All of them had balances. And I did exactly what you said. I found a bank, and I can't remember which one it was, and they were offering a 12-month a 12-month zero APR for the first 12 months, and I could bring in any I could basically pay off what I needed to and consolidate it all onto that credit card. And that's what I
Hmm.
did. I consolidated it all onto that one card. And what I did for that 12 months is I tried to apply more than the minimum monthly payment so I could get it all paid off in 12 months. So that's
Hmm.
certainly like a strategy that you could do. Um, like we're not saying that this is the method to do, but it's
No.
definitely something I've experienced in the past. Lisa, you're doing it now. The one the one thing I'm gonna say though is that make sure you understand what the interest rate's gonna be after the teaser rate, after the promotional APR is
Hmm.
over, because it could be 30, 40%. You never know. And
Hmm.
and don't let it be an excuse to then have another credit card because then you may want to start using that credit card that now has a zero balance that you transferred over. So you're kind
Yeah,
of making yourself a promise that you're not going to use those other credit cards anymore.
there you
So
go.
yeah,
That's the
a good
only card I have
suggestion.
right now. I mean, it's it's on the way. It's in the mail.
Nice.
So I'm excited
Good
about that.
suggestion.
All right. Yep. All right then, sir. Well, you take care. I'll see you next month.
All right, we'll see you. Thanks, Lisa. Bye, everyone.
Bye.